Բարի երեկո սիրելի արնագիստներ, ինչպես ամեն շաբաթ երեկո կմիանանք ուղի եթերով, այսօր շատ կարևոր հաղորդումը պիտի ունենանք, շատ կարևոր անձնավորության հետ, մեմիևս անգլերեն եւ որովհետեւ ամերիկացիներ են, ադորամար անգլերեն կխոսենք, հայերեն չենք խոսիր, հուսով եմ որ բավականին պիտի հասկանաք, բայց կարևոր ինտերվյուն է, շատ կարևոր անձնավորության հետ, որ TV-ներու վրա շատ չեր հնար, նախկին CIA officer, Veteran CIA officer, Ray McGovern, որ president-ին նախինում briefing կներ ամեն օր։ Եվ այսօր պիտի խոսենք իրեն այդ անգլերեն լեզվով եւ պիտի տեսնանք իրեն input-ները, իրեն գարձիկները, իրեն ճշմարտությունները, ինչ կդառնա այսօր Միացյալ Նահանգներու մեջ, որ ովքեր են այդ ուժերը, որ գուզեն հանել բանոն Թրամփին, president Թրամփին եւ ուրիշ անձնավորության մտնեն, որ կարողանան բոլոր ամերիկան կանթեն։ I will start in English. Thanks for joining us. Our guest today, we have two guests. One of them is distinguished guest, Mr. Ray McGovern, who is a veteran CIA officer who became an activist, and he was one of the individuals that organized the briefing every day to the president. Thank you for being here, Mr. McGovern. And we also have Mr. Gerald Pechenuk with LaRouche PAC, who is the West Coast representative. Thank you for both being online.
Thank you.
Mr. McGovern, I want to start with you because you're the individual, you're the main guest today to talk to our community what's really taking place, because we are not much informed through the fake news that we see throughout either mainstream media or some of the medias that are not even mainstream. We see bombardment of fake news, but obviously the intelligence agency has the answer what's really taking place, and obviously it seems like there is a war between the intelligence agency and the deep state. Would you please, can we start from there, please?
Yes, thanks for the opportunity. Now, I understand my good friend Bill Binney was on your show 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
And I'm sure that he mentioned that NSA is in possession of all emails, all texts, all telephone conversations. When I said to my friend Bill, I said, Bill, that boggles the mind. And he said, Ray, believe me, we're capable of doing that, and we do it, okay? So that's the background all here. If the FBI or the State Department is looking for Hillary's lost emails, all they have to do is go to the National Security Agency and query their data bank. That's sort of a backdrop here. Now, the other major player here, which is really the first time I've seen, well, I take that back. This is the second time I've seen what we call the mainstream media so politicized and so corrupt. I've been here in Washington 55 years, so I've seen a lot of change. But there's one change that dwarfs all the other changes in significance, and that is that we no longer have, in any real sense, a free media that is big, could not be bigger. And so just as before the war in Iraq, the New York Times, Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, everyone taught the Americans to believe that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and that Saddam Hussein was about to give those weapons of mass destruction to Al-Qaeda.
Right.
Both of them, we knew, were untrue. Now, you would think that they had learned a lesson from that, or that the American people would remember that you can't believe what you see in the New York Times. But when every day, it is really, it's almost every day, you have a new story about how the Russians interfered in our election with no proof, then people tend to believe this stuff. And so people around my neighborhood here, people in my own family say, well, if the New York Times says it 10 times, it's got to be true. And it ain't true. And the implications of this, not only for our foreign policy, and I'll just dismiss that quickly, Relations with Russia are very, very important. I'm a Russian specialist. I've studied the Soviet Union, now Russia, for 55 years now, if you can believe it, since I majored in Russian in college. Relations with Russia need not be so bad as they are now. But there are people who profiteer on a degree of friction and almost war with Russia. And those are the ones that are pushing this legend that Mr. Trump owes his election victory to whom? To Vladimir Putin, right?
Right.
So that's part of it. And so we have to get below that veneer of verisimilitude, of apparent truth, and tell people, no, it's not that at all. We have to get them to listen to programs like this, to look at the proper websites and realize that it's a hoax, that it's a fable, a legend about Russian interference. Now, up until now, it's been a real hard struggle. Now, well, still hard, but now we have hard evidence that someone interfered in the U.S. election in 2016. But it wasn't the Russians. Would you believe it was the FBI and the CIA and the NSA? And would you believe I can prove it? And would you believe I can prove it with emails and with text messages that have now been released? Do you see that in the New York Times? No. Washington Post? No. Some of those messages were deleted.
Right.
Did we see that? No, they were. The best headline was the FBI was trying to recover lost messages. Lost? Lost? They're no more lost than the soldiers we lost in Iraq on a fool's errand. Those weren't lost, those were killed. These messages weren't lost. They were destroyed. And when we talk about inadvertent destruction, I mean, you don't have to be a brain surgeon to realize that that's a canard. The Washington Post, here's the Washington Post saying, this was a glitch, and it affected many, many people, it affected people who were investigating Trump. A glitch. Give me a break. We know what glitches are, and we know that even if there were a glitch, and Bill Binney reassured me about this just 2 days ago, even if there were things destroyed, NSA has the backup. Okay,
Absolutely.
so the issue is joined right now. The House has this new information. The fact that you don't see it in the New York Times, that should not prevent the House from proceeding against these crooks.
Right.
And I use the word advisedly. Crooks at the very top level of the FBI, Department of Justice, CIA, and NSA. Now the question is, will he have the courage to do that? Will he take on these very, very powerful institutions? That remains to be seen. Usually, the deep state wins every time. So we'll have to count on uncommon courage on Nunes's part. And I have to say that I'm a little distressed so far. He talked about the 4-page memo that he put together, and yet he hasn't released it. And the Department of Justice says that to do that would be extraordinarily reckless. And so the issue is joined, but the outcome is far from clear.
So basically, there is a 4-page memo, as we spoke with other guests to last week and prior to last week, and there are 4-page memos which hasn't been released yet, and members of Congress, I know some of them that read it, they said it is very disturbing. Can we elaborate on why has it been taking so long that it hasn't been revealed? Is the deep state so powerful that people are scared, and even the president hasn't given the authority to be released?
Well, there's precedent for this, and I always find it very helpful to cite past precedent. When Obama was president, the Senate, to its credit, did a long 4-year study based on CIA original documents on torture, pure and simple. What did it achieve? How bad was it? And those young staffers toiled very, very hard and put out a memo at the very end of 2015.
Right.
Okay. Now, 2014. Now, what was going to happen? The Senate was going to change hands. It was going to be out of Dianne Feinstein's hands. And she had completed this memo. She wanted it published. Who objected to it being published? A fellow named by the name of Obama.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because he was protecting John Brennan. John Brennan looked like the crook he is, not only for approving this kind of torture, but for making believe that some good information came out of this torture. And the report indicated quite the opposite. So right up until the end, up until December, Obama and Brennan were working really hard to prevent Dianne Feinstein from doing it. To her great credit, she used a little ploy. She said, now Mark Udall, a senator from Colorado, he lost his re-election campaign, and he has nothing to lose. And he feels very strongly about the release of this memo. And so he's going to read it from the floor. So you got a choice, Mr. President. You release the declassified version, or Mark Udall reads it from the floor. And it was only that kind of leverage that sprung that memo loose. That's the kind of power the CIA had over Obama. Now, how about Trump? Well, we know about the JFK assassination, right? I happen to believe that the CIA and the FBI and certain elements of the Secret Service and others, the military, knew about what was going to happen and actually were responsible for it. But a lot of the records have been kept secret. President Obama bragged about 2 months ago, oops, I'm going to release them all. In the morning, he said, they'll be all released. I'm very proud of this. In the afternoon, he said, oh, I'm sorry. They won't all be released. Maybe 6 months from now, the CIA and the FBI won't let me release them. He said that, okay? So what I'm saying here is that the deep state, so-called, has incredible power. And among that power comes the potential to, well, let's just say it, blackmail people, okay? Now, when you talk about NSA, and I'm sure Bill Binney mentioned this, NSA has the book on everyone. And they're like this with the FBI. And so for people who want to go against this deep state, they have to have either a life as pure as Caesar's wife, or they have to be at an age where they don't care what dirt is given to the newspapers about them. So this is a really terrible thing to say, because J. Edgar Hoover did this all the time. We thought we had issued laws and strictures against that in the mid-'70s when we got rid of him and imposed these laws like the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. But once after 9/11, all that stuff sort of changed. The Fourth Amendment, which protects our privacy, and so we're in a situation now where the people who control what the Russians used to call orgаны государственной безопасности, the organs of state security, okay? Well, they're secure. The question is whether we're secure in our persons and our effects and everything else, and how much freedom, and this is bizarre, I hear myself saying this, how much freedom the President of the United States has to make the decisions that he should be able to make. And the longer this thing goes on with Representative Nunes not releasing this 4-page memo, that gives me to believe that President Trump and Representative Nunes say, well, these people are too powerful. We can't do it. That would be a terrible shame.
Absolutely. And you being a veteran CIA officer, you've seen everything because you're one of the professionals. But I would like to ask you a question. Is this act to overthrow the Constitution of the United States, or is it act just to overthrow the president and replace him with somebody else? What are we facing here?
Yeah. Well, I think it's pretty much the same thing, Bedros. What has been happening has been extra legal. Congress has passed laws that directly contravene the Fourth Amendment, for example. And so my lawyer friends tell me that this has happened in the past, and it usually takes a decade or maybe even more for the Supreme Court to say, oh, no, you can't really snoop on all Americans without probable cause. And so we're in that interim period now where they're doing it, and they're doing it to everyone. And, when Edward Snowden came out, you remember the phrase he used. He saw turnkey tyranny happening in our country. So the key's in there. All it's got to do is be turned. Well, they just passed a FISA law that helps turn it a little bit more. And the irony of the whole business is that it's done under the banner of preventing terrorists, right? Okay. And in reality, as perhaps Bill Binney explained, collecting it all is the proverbial haystack. And it makes it very, very difficult to find the needle in the haystack. And so what this dragnet surveillance permits is analogous to what J. Edgar Hoover discovered. Fingerprints, right? Okay. Now, how many bank robberies have been prevented by fingerprints? Well, I don't know of any. How about robbers? How about robbers seized and prosecuted? Well, yeah, it's really, if they leave their on a teller's window, sure, you got them, okay? But it's the same with terrorism. You got all this stuff. Boston bombers. They went back into the records and, oh yeah, well, the Russians warned us against it twice. The Russians warned us. They're on the list, but they got too much stuff. And with this latest reauthorization of the FISA Act, it's just going to compound that problem. Lots of people, surveillance mechanisms are making lots of money. Usually you can find some money at the core of all this.
Absolutely. So you also confronted few congressmen, and one of them, I have the video on that. I would like to show, if I may. Can we have the first video, please? And I'm going to let the video roll. You're confronting Adam Schiff, which is the congressman for this district, and I want the audience to watch it. Let's go to the video, please.
Schiff, my name is Ray McGovern. I served in CIA under 7 presidents and 9 directors.
Well, thank you very much.
We have a little alumni group called Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, and we've been following this issue very closely. One of our members is the former technical director of NSA. I'm interested in 1 week ago when the president said this, I don't want to misquote him. The conclusions of the intelligence community with respect to Russian hacking were not conclusive regarding WikiLeaks. In other words, there's a big gap between alleged Russian hacking and WikiLeaks. The intelligence community does not know how or if that information, to the degree it exists, got to WikiLeaks. Now, you assert as flat fact that Russia did this. Do you know more than Obama?
I would never claim to know more than Obama. I think he's a brilliant man.
It's a very serious question.
No, it's a serious question. I have every confidence in the intelligence of the Russian hacking of both the DNC as well as John Podesta.
James Clapper is a convicted...
You asked me a question. Do you want to hear the answer?
I will.
While I can't go into the classified information, I have every confidence that the Russians used WikiLeaks. Whether Julian Assange was a knowing participant or, as the Russians would describe, a useful idiot, that we will hopefully find out. But I don't have any question in the conclusions that the intelligence
You have every confidence but no evidence. Is that right?
No, I can't share the evidence with you.
Yeah.
Congressman, I'm Paul
that's
Joy.
bogus.
I'm former
That's
Director
bogus.
of Security Senate Intelligence. We always refer to it as the SSCI.
We watched a small 2-minute conversation you took place with Adam Schiff, Congressman Adam Schiff. And I'm going to give you the floor. Obviously, you confronted him with the information that the Russian hacking was completely false and false flag. And his answer was, that's classified information, that's top secret or something like that, he cannot answer. I'm going to give you the floor, Mr. McGovern.
Sure. Well, you saw what I said, that it was what did I say? It was a hoax or a
right.
Bogus is what the word I used. One of the advantages of living in the Washington area is that when people like Schiff appear at these think tanks, this was Hillary Clinton's and Podesta's think tank, you can go. You can weasel in, and then, if you're lucky, you can ask a question, okay? Well, I had just asked the question 2 days before. They didn't like the question, so they didn't call on me this time. So I went up after Schiff had told everyone that it was a sure thing that the Democrats had the goods on the Russians having hacked into the election and this terrible thing, and it was an act of war. I mean, hello, that's what they said. It was an act of war. Okay, so I went up afterwards. Now I didn't know the camera was still on, but luckily it was. So you saw what I had to say to him. I said, "So you're completely confident that the CIA had the information, but you don't have any of the information." I can't. I think he said, "I can't share it with you." Well, that's bogus. That's the word I use. That's really bogus. And he's beginning to sweat now. You know, he's got this angelic little boyish face. But if you look at the beads of sweat that are coming down, if a fellow like Schiff, representative from California, can be embarrassed, well, he's the prime candidate now, because it's proven not only that there was no hack, and Bill Binney, I'm sure, took you through that,
right,
but it's also proven that there was mischief, and the Democrats were deeply involved in the mischief, and so was the FBI, the CIA, and some people in Congress. So, again, the issue is joined. It's going to be very interesting to see, number one, if the House and the Senate do exercise their constitutional prerogatives to oversee and investigate these things. And then number two, of equal importance, whether the mainstream media will cover these hearings or whether they'll say, oh no, this is just the Republicans trying to put the kibosh on Mueller's investigation. That's the line they have now. This is all an effort to deflect attention from Mueller's investigation. So we'll have to see how it plays out, but never have I seen the issue joined so tightly and with such implications for our republic. Because, I was remembering what Ben Franklin, after the Constitutional Convention was over in 1787, there's a famous story, and it's true because it came in the notes of a representative from Maryland named McHenry. He said, this lady said, now, Mr. Franklin, what have you given us? A republic or a monarchy? And Franklin looked at her straight in the eye, and he said, a republic, if you can keep it. Well, we're going to find out. And this is, I don't think this is an exaggeration. We're going to find out in the next 2 or 3 months whether we can keep this republic or we're going to turn it over to crooks like Comey, Mueller, Brennan, Rogers, the whole security apparatus that has undue influence over everything we do, together with the military-industrial complex, which is making lots of money on this faux tension stoked up against Russia, against the wishes or the apparent wishes of what Trump and his people wanted to do once they came into office.
It is obvious that President Trump does not want to start wars, and obviously what we see in the Middle East right now is going to be leading towards wars against his will. Do you have any information on that?
Well, again, Trump is president, right?
Right.
Now, why is he sending more troops to Afghanistan to a fool's errand, you know? I mean, Afghanistan, Alexander the Great, for God's sake, he was the first one I know in history that thought it'd be really neat to go through Afghanistan into China, where there's lots of stuff to buy, you know? And he started taking all kinds of casualties on his flanks from these ridiculous people who don't like foreigners invading their country, right? Mm-hmm. And so he convened a council of war with his generals, and he said, how many casualties? How many casualties? God, you know, and look at those mountains between us and China. You know, I think maybe we ought to go back to the Near East where we know what the heck we're doing, you know? Now, why do they call Alexander the Great? I think that's why. He was great enough to figure out this is a fool's errand. Since then, you've had the British, you've had the Persians, you've had the Indians, you've had the Chinese. You have all these people, the British again, and then us trying to interfere there. So I don't know what makes Trump do that, but I suspect that the influence of the military-industrial complex is rather strong here. And the same goes for Syria. The Syria war should be over. I don't know why our military is insisting on maintaining a permanent presence in Syria when, number one, we're not invited, and number two, ISIS is defeated. So what are we doing there? So I guess, you know, I have lots of questions with respect to who's running our foreign policy, and that's kind of an uncomfortable position to be in.
Could it be the runners after foreign policy are not in agreement with President Trump, what's taking place in Middle East, and President Trump does not want to give orders, and he's being forced through the deep state, and that's the war about. Just like you said, within 2 months we will find out who will win, either the deep state or the Constitution.
That's the big question, and so far it's not gone very well for the Trump administration. Now they have an opportunity to right the ship of state, make it safe and go straight ahead, but that's going to take uncommon courage, and I want to believe that's possible, especially on this specific issue. Interference in the election. Give me a break. There was interference, and we have to pursue those who interfered. And then, if that's done, then maybe we can do sensible things in foreign policy. Work with the Russians in Syria. Work with the Russians in other areas, because there is a willing cooperator in Moscow. This is something that's banned from the New York Times, but Mr. Putin has acted in a very, well, what shall I say, a very statesmanlike way to some of the provocations that the United States and NATO have made in Central Europe.
We have a phone call from the audience. I want to go to the phones. Yes, you're on the air.
Hello?
Yes, you're on the air.
Barışız.
Yes,
because...
Go ahead.
Ես Թրամփն ընտրել, բայց ինչու՞ հետա Քրոմավորից Հիսուս Քրիստոսին նվիրված հավատացյալները Թրամփին որպես այդպիսի խարակսեր
Ադի այսօրվա նյութը չեն Քրիստոսի հետ ինչ
քանսուն կամ ոչ կյանքը մանիպուլեյտ արել որ ստախոսություն անում
Okay, հիմա ադի այսօրվա նյութը չէ, մենք այսօր լրիվ ուրիշ նյութ կխոսենք, որ ճիշտ է, այո, ընդրություններու մասին չէ, ոչ ալ իր սուդախոսություններուն կամ ճշմարտություններու մասին Այսօրվա նյութը ուրիշ է, այսօրվա նյութը եթե չեք հասկնար, փասադրեմ, I need to explain a couple of words in Armenian, եթե չեք հասկնար, փասադրեմ բարինում փունի մաստով, այսօրվա նյութը ով հեքինգը ըրավ Միացյալ Նահանգներու ընդրության մեջ, դեմոկրատները եւ ցախագոմյանները, համայնավարները գսեն Ռուսաստանը ըրավ, որ այսօր intelligence community-ի միջոցով կփածադրվի, որ սխալ է, այդպիսի բանը չի եղած սուդախոսություն է եւ որովհետեւ գուզեն բادرազմները շարունակեն գուզեն բարոն Թրամփին դուրս անեն so այսօրվա նյութը ծեր հարցումի հետ հեչ կապ չունի այո հրամեցեք
Այս պարոն Bedros Hajiani հետ խոսում
Գխոսիկ կոր հրամեցեք Այո խոսեցեք հրամեցեք
Պարոն Hajian Պարոն Հաջան։
Լավ խոսեցեք։
Ինչ եք ճանանում դուք փաստեք։
Հիմա ես սեզի չի նստին փաստեմ, ինչ եմ ճանանում փաստեմ, նախ եւ առաջ հայերեն սորվեցեք, ինչ կչանակ փաստենք, ոչ ճանաչում փաստեք, վերջը հարցումն դիտ հարցուցեք։ Sorry for the interference, we had to explain a couple of words in Armenian, and I had to explain what are we talking about, few people that didn't understand. Ոստե փասադրելու կամ փաստելու բան մը չի գա, ցեզի լավ փասադրեմ ասիգա, եթե դուք Միացյալ Նահանգներու մեջ կապրիք եւ այստեղի քաղաքականությունները դերակ չեք եւ մի անգուզեք դեմոկրատներու եւ ազատամիքներու գոմեն երթակ եւ բոլոր մեր ասկ ինչպես որ այսօր կտեսնանք ցեղասպանության եզրին կանգնած է, որովհետեւ մեր ղեկավարությունները թավաջան ազատամիքությունը մեր համայնքներու մեջ եւ սերունդներու մեջ տարածած են, այդ կուզեմ որ փաստել, եթե կուզեք չանաչում փաստեմ, եթե կուզեք գիտնակ։ I'm sorry about my Armenian. I had to explain a couple of things. Now I want to go back to the questioning, continuing after questioning. Obviously, we talked about the 4-page memos, and it might come out into public and it might not come out into public, as you said. What can the public do? Do we have phone numbers to call to the Congress, to the Senate, to basically enforce this coup against Trump or against the Constitution, let's put it this way?
Well, I think that the right steps have already been mentioned. You get in touch with your representatives. You go to Representative Schiff's office, which I understand is not far from where you are right now, and you ask him why would he object to the release of this memorandum. You have to kind of press these things now in a way that has not been so familiar in the past. Dr. King often said there is such a thing as too late. And in my view, we need to get out in the streets and make sure that other people realize how serious this is. Young people, I was talking to some college graduates that were 1 year old when 9/11 happened and have no feel for what our civil liberties used to be. And so it seems to me that we older folks, and I speak for myself, need to put our bodies into it. When I was beaten up simply for standing and turning my back on Hillary Clinton without saying a word, just standing there for 6 or 7 minutes before I was grabbed and beaten up, what happened was that my friends in Veterans for Peace, I had this great big Veterans for Peace shirt on, they called all the people at Veterans for Peace and others, and Hillary Clinton received several thousands of emails and telephone calls. Now, why? Well, it sounds funny, I guess, but the American people don't like to see old folks getting beat up. It's that simple. Young people, they got it coming to them. They should really know. But old folks, with a little bit of hair like this, okay, they don't like to see old folks beaten up. So what I say to audiences that have old folks like me is this. I say you have a big advantage. Big advantage. You need to put it into play, not only for yourself, but so that these younger people can see that we've been through this. We know that what it's like to live in more freedom, but we recognize these dangers for what they are, not very dissimilar from those that existed in Nazi Germany in 1933. And so there must be something serious going on here. That way we can get the attention of younger people, people in college and the universities, and maybe make an impression and tell them, look, this is your life we're fighting for, your life and those of your children.
Absolutely. I would like to ask a question to Gerald, if I may. Is there any pamphlets, is there any phone lines for the community to call the government, the local Congress through LaRouche PAC, that they can basically call and ask for the memos to be released and Can they send thousands of emails or mails?
Yes, absolutely. And I was going to say that would be particularly important this coming week for two reasons.
Right.
Number one, President Trump is going to give his State of the Union address on Tuesday. And that is the January 30th, which just happens to fall on the birthday of former President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And in a certain way, Trump has echoed the idea of that I'm representing the forgotten men and women, which is what President Roosevelt talked about, especially on his fireside chats and appearances, etc. And the reason I'm saying this is because one of the things that's reported to be being discussed at this State of the Union address is the infrastructure, is kind of a revival of what Mr. LaRouche, Lyndon LaRouche PAC, has called reviving the American system of economics. And as we have discussed in the various weeks, one of the other players in this game is the British intelligence, is Mr. Christopher Steele, who's played a very nefarious role with these various people that Ray McGovern mentioned, actually meeting with people from the Justice Department, Mr. Bruce Orr, actually working with Peter Strzok, to bring the FISA warrant to eavesdrop on Trump's campaign and Trump's. So I would say this week, with that State of the Union address and the report by Congressman Matt Gaetz from Florida, that the memo may be released Wednesday. So you have a State of the Union address Tuesday and a possible release of the memo Wednesday. And so everyone should call their congressman. The switchboard number is 202-224-3121. And as I understand it, people like Sean Hannity have been urging people to call. We've been urging people to call. And these congressmen are being bombarded with calls on this. So I think that's very good. On the second point, we have produced a dossier, not the Christopher Steele dossier, but the LaRouche PAC dossier, titled "Robert Mueller is an Amoral Legal Assassin. He will do his job if you let him." And this is devastating because not only does it go through, as Ray McGovern said, Mueller really has a reputation as Mr. Clean. He's Dudley Do-Right. He's beyond reproach. But as Senator Bob Graham described him, he was involved in aggressive deception of the American people regarding 9/11. He was head of FBI right before 9/11 for an unprecedented number of years. So I think this dossier on Robert Mueller is an amoral legal assassin, which, by the way, today happens to be the 24th anniversary of the day Mr. Lyndon LaRouche was released from prison in Rochester, Minnesota in 1994. And Robert Mueller was involved in the frame-up and jailing of Mr. LaRouche. So he's been a liar, a stinker, a cover-up artist on 9/11, on the anthrax case, on the case of the Panamanian general. So this is, as Ray said, this is going to take courage because these people have gotten away with murder. They've literally gotten away with murder, with the lies for the Iraq war. Lies for Libya war. Lies, on this, as another researcher Mr. Trevor Aronson documented when he looked through all cases of terrorism in the United States. He went through every single record from 2001 to 2010. The FBI was directly involved with provocateurs providing bombs. 85% of those cases, the FBI manufactured terrorism. So this is deep shit coming from the deep state. And the British, you know, as I read the quote from the British intelligence themselves, they consider themselves the experts at how to manipulate, because they don't have the brawn, but this is the idea that America is going to be the dumb giant that Churchill initiated with the Iron Curtain with Harry S. Truman in right after World War II. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt is the one who had a good neighbor with Russia, opened up the relations with Russia. Franklin Delano Roosevelt wanted to end British and other colonialism around the world. And that's ultimately how we defeat this, is we unite people. Because the Democratic Party was the party of FDR, not of FBI. I think they need some spelling lessons. They're spelling FDR, FBI, and the Democratic Party and the people who are so-called liberals. And that's why I think Ray McGovern is outstanding, because even though he disagrees with Trump, does not support him, he said, this is bigger than all of it, because this is the future of the Constitution and the nation. And the Constitution is for posterity. It's for ourselves and our posterity. So if we don't fight now, when as Ray said, the showdown is now. There's not very often that you've had congressmen and presidents who are willing to fight out in the open, and therefore the population, the ordinary citizens, have to get involved. They must get involved, because if they don't get involved, then you're going to have a tragedy. The time to stop the tragedy is before it happens, you know. And Ray may know more about this guy named Mudd, M-U-D-D, who's a commentator on Confederate News Network, CNN. Philip Mudd was brought over from the CIA by Mueller into his FBI, and Mudd went on TV and said, with Jack Tapper on CNN, the U.S. government is going to kill this guy, talking about Trump. He just openly said it on CNN. So where did these schmucks get away with this stuff? And it's exactly what we're talking about, because there are media bullshit, lies that continues, and it's courageous people like Bedros and others that are standing up. And that is why it is so important that people get involved and call their congressmen and get in touch with LaRouche PAC, for the purpose of getting this material and getting on the LaRouchePAC.com website for further updates, including you can see Ray McGovern and Bill Binney speaking in depth on this at several meetings, in recent days.
Thank you very much, Mr. McGovern. I'm going to come back to you with a question. Obviously, there is a war between the military complex, which is the deep state, let's put it that way, and the current constitution, which is against it. However, I would like to ask you, how would an individual American, whether he's Armenian, Arab, Irish, that are living here in the United States, how will it be affected by the wars that are coming? Once the deep state wins again, what kind of dangers individual citizens are facing, if you may?
The main danger, of course, comes from people with whom we are stoking up tension.
Right.
First and foremost, Russia. Now, if you look at all this from Mr. Putin's point of view, you have a cooperative relationship back in 2013, when President Obama had the good sense to resist pressure to make an open war on Syria. There was a chemical event outside of Damascus. It was blamed on Bashar al-Assad, but we know who did it. It was the rebels, probably the moderate rebels.
Right.
The United States. And the precursors for these chemicals used in the sarin attacks came through Turkey. We know the whole story. There was testimony before the Turkish parliament on this, okay? Now, what happened? Long story short, Obama went up to St. Petersburg for a summit. And Putin took him aside and said, look, Mr. Obama, you have a problem here. Everyone wants you to attack Syria, but we think we can help. And Obama said, how's that? He said, don't you remember when we met in Ireland in June? We're talking 2013 now. Don't you remember when we decided that Bashar al-Assad doesn't want those chemical weapons? They're all leaking and they're out of date. So we have a working group, and they come to an agreement, and the Syrians are willing to give up all their chemical weapons. And Obama says, how come nobody told me about this? So Putin said, look, watch TV tomorrow and you'll see the Syrian foreign minister say that. And sure enough, the Syrian foreign minister said, we're willing to give up all our chemical weapons for destruction on U.S. ships under the supervision of UN. Guess what? That happened. Guess what? People don't know that happened. But Putin and Obama had this relationship in early September 2013. Now, what was remarkable? Well, on September 11th, coincidence, no doubt, but on September 11th, 2013, Vladimir Putin wrote an op-ed that appeared in the New York Times. And at the end of that op-ed, he talked about the close relationship that then existed, not only between our two countries in cooperating to get these chemical weapons destroyed, but personally between Putin and Obama. And then he said, and I'm reliably informed that he wrote these sentences himself at the end of the op-ed. He said, the only thing I disagree with Mr. Obama on is that I don't believe that there's a sole indispensable country in the world. I don't think that it's right to say there's one special country in the world. I think all countries are equal. Some of them are closer to democracy, others are developing, but under God's reign, all countries are equal. And I would really like to see Mr. Obama stop saying that the American people are more equal than others, okay? Now, that was basically candid, but the atmosphere was good. Now, what happened? 6 months later, the neocons, the people who want war with Russia, arranged a coup d'etat in Kiev, that capital of the Ukraine. Now, this is not a big secret. This was the most blatant coup in human history because it was advertised 2.5 weeks beforehand on YouTube. Can you imagine? Yeah. Someone intercepted a conversation between Victoria Nuland, the Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs, and Jeffrey Pyatt, the U.S. ambassador in Kiev. And Nuland is saying, oh, we got this thing wired now. It's all going to be glued together. Yats is the guy. He knows about the IMF. He knows about how we have to take stringent economic measures. And we'll let Klitschko and the others wait in the wings, and we're all set. We'll have, if Biden wants to help us glue this thing, it's all set. Well, that was on YouTube on the 4th of February, 2014. So we're talking 6 months after Syria. Okay? So what happens on February 22nd? There's a coup. And who becomes the prime minister? Yachts. I wrote an article that day. I said, yikes, it's yachts. Yats was Yatsenyuk, right? He was our hand-picked person. It's right in the conversation, okay? So, what happened? Well, Mr. Putin was in Sochi at the Olympics. He came back and he consulted with his generals, and they said, my God, NATO is expanding closer and closer to our periphery. Can we abide the notion that Ukraine will become part of NATO? What would that mean? And Putin said, well, what about Crimea? And they said, well, yeah, that's our only all-weather, all-year-round naval base. We have air bases there. We can't let NATO come into Crimea. And so they decided, well, how do the Crimeans feel about this? Which is a sensible thing to ask, right? And they were all, the answer was very clear. They would clearly like to, they're mostly Russian stock, they would clearly like to be part of Russia again. So they said, let's have a plebiscite, a referendum, and sure enough, over 90% of the Crimeans voted to rejoin Russia. And they did, okay? And Putin blessed that. Now, what happened? Whoa! The fable went around the world that the Russians invaded Crimea, which they did not. They already had 30,000 troops there to guard their naval port under a bilateral agreement with Ukraine, and that the Russians invaded eastern Ukraine, which they did not. The people in eastern Ukraine didn't want any part of the coup regime led by many fascists. They knew what fascists were like, okay? And so the Russians helped them, and they helped them. They gave them foodstuffs, they gave them some warriors, I'm sure, and some arms. So what happened? Long story short, the U.S. insisted that everyone put economic sanctions on Russia, and then a plane was shot down on July 17th, 2014, MH17. That was blamed on the Russians. We don't know who it was. Kerry, Secretary of State Kerry, said we have indications about trajectory. We know when the plane was shot down. We know where the shot came from. We knew how it fell. But you know what? John Kerry never showed anybody that information. He didn't give it to the Dutch, who were using the... So, long story short, they used this to institute even more sanctions, this time getting the Europeans to do the same thing. Now, the Europeans hurt from sanctions.
Right.
U.S., not so much. So the deterioration of relations started then, and the neocons were sitting back saying, whoa, we've been able to exploit the Russian reaction to what we did in Kiev. And that was the start of it. And most of what the Russians have done since has been in reaction to NATO buildup.
That's right.
The Polish border, where Napoleon came through, where Hitler came through. How do the Russians look at 30,000 NATO troops right on the Polish border when they lost 27 million people in World War II? Now, coming up is the anniversary of the siege of Leningrad. Now, I was in Leningrad a year and a half ago. I went to those memorials where a million people perished, including Putin's big brother. Okay,
Right.
That's important. Putin knows what war is like. The Americans don't. So all this is in the calculus here. And if they're able to prevent Trump reaching out to have a sensible relationship with Russia, implications are worldwide. The implications are that the Russians, watching us build up our anti-ballistic missile systems on their periphery, they will think, maybe the Pentagon thinks, that they could do a first strike. And so what do you have? You have, instead of 30 minutes to decide whether to retaliate, you got 10 minutes, and that's really, really dangerous.
Mr. McGovern, it's a pleasure to talk to you with your professional information that you give to our audiences, to our community today. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you for being online. Thank you, Gerald, for being online. You two can hold online. I have to close the program. Սիրելիներ, այսօր մեր ժամանակը վերջացավ։ Մինչև քաշապատ ասված սեր բոլորի հետ։
My dear compatriots, my name is Saida Ohanyan and I'm the head of the Hamshanuhi, International Women's Association. Our goals are the protection of women's rights, the international recognition and condemnation of the Armenian genocide, the protection of the rights of other indigenous peoples. The priority of our work is also the assistance to the solution of general human programs. This year, our organization has applied to the Nobel Committee with a proposal to award Nobel Peace Prize to the member of the Turkish parliament, Gerald Pechenuk, an individual who has dedicated his life to the protection of the rights of the Armenian and other indigenous people of the region. Today, Pechenuk is one of the few people who undertake responsibility for protecting the human rights of indigenous people, religious and ethnic minorities. The peace seats sown by Pechenuk for the mutual understanding and tolerance between the representatives of different nationalities and religions are giving positive results in the Turkish public. And despite all the actual pressures and threats he has suffered from nationalist and extremist forces which are all linked to the authorities who demand him to end his human and political activities. I call on all institutions and organizations protecting goodwill, women's and human rights in general to participate in this initiative and to vote for Gerald Pechenuk or make individual submissions suggesting Pechenuk's nomination. I ask you also to apply to the Nobel Committee with a request to award Gerald Pechenuk with Nobel Peace Prize 2018 as the greatest humanist of our time. The time of application is limited. The last day is January 30. I am sure that your participation will contribute to peace in the Near East and serve the cause of peace and harmony among all nationalities of the world.
Ինչպես գիտեք, այս տարի